20. R&B stars who died of AIDS. What if we told you that some of the most iconic voices in R&B voices that shaped generations were silenced by a deadly epidemic that no one wanted to talk about? Behind the fame, the platinum records, and the velvet vocals were secrets, stigma, and suffering. These 20 legends didn't just battle for chart positions, they fought for their lives. And many lost that battle to AIDS. Their stories have been buried for too long. It's time to bring them back. Hit that like button, subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence, and prepare to hear the Ronnie Dyson. Ronnie Dyson's rise to fame was rooted in both Broadway and soul music, a rare crossover that made him stand out in the 1970s. Born June 5, 1950 in Washington, D.C., he was raised in Brooklyn, New York, where he honed his vocal talents in church and school choirs. His big break came not in a recording booth, but on stage when he was cast in the original Broadway production of Hair in 1968. At just 18, Dyson's soaring voice led the anthem Aquarius, introducing him to a national audience and launching his music career. In 1970, he transitioned into recording with Columbia Records, debuting with the single If You Let Me Make Love to You, Then Why Can't I Touch You? A soulful ballad that soared into the top 10 on the Billboard R&B and Hot 100 charts. The song showcased Dyson's silky tenor and emotional delivery, making him one of the youngest black male artists of his time to gain mainstream attention. His music leaned into rich orchestral arrangements and heartfelt lyrics, a hallmark of Philadelphia soul. Throughout the early to mid-1970s, Dyson continued to produce hits such as I Just Don't Want to Be Lonely and One Man Band Plays All Alone. His albums were praised for their lush instrumentation and sincere vocal interpretations, earning him a loyal fan base within the soul and adult contemporary communities. However, by the late 1970s, his output began to slow, due in part to personal struggles and a music industry increasingly turning toward disco and funk. In the 1980s, Dyson's presence in the mainstream diminished, though he remained active in touring and small label projects. Behind the scenes, however, he was battling severe health issues. Tragically, on November 10, 1990, Ronnie Dyson died from complications related to AIDS. He was only 39 years old. His death shocked many, especially as he had kept his diagnosis private, a common response at a time when AIDS was heavily stigmatized, particularly for black male performers. Dyson's passing marked not just the end of a talented vocalist's life, but also served as a painful reminder of how many brilliant artists were lost during the height of the AIDS crisis. Ronnie Dyson's legacy lives on in the smooth, emotive storytelling of his music, a voice that once defined a generation of soul and now echoes as part of a larger tragic chapter in R&B history. Eric Lynn Wright. Before becoming a controversial pioneer of gangsta rap, Eric Lynn Wright, better known as Eazy-E, was a young entrepreneur from Compton with a sharp ear for music and a knack for business. Born on September 7, 1964, Wright grew up amid the social and economic turbulence of South Central Los Angeles. He first found financial success through illicit means, but ultimately channeled that income into music, founding Ruthless Records in 1986. Though he's best remembered for his role in NWA, one of the most influential hip-hop groups in history, Eazy-E's impact extended deeply into R&B. Ruthless Records was not only a rap powerhouse, it fostered a number of R&B talents and helped introduce a harder, more realistic tone to urban storytelling, one that reflected the crossover between Soul Street and social struggle. With tracks like Boys in the Hood and his solo debut, Easy Does It, Eazy-E's charisma and nasal vocal style stood out. He was brash, unapologetic, and entirely original. Behind his public persona, however, Eazy-E led a life filled with risk, including an aspect that would eventually lead to tragedy. In early 1995, Eazy-E was hospitalized with what was believed to be asthma. But within days, doctors diagnosed him with AIDS. Just a month later, on March 26, 1995, he died at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles at the young age of 31. The shock was immediate and widespread. Eazy-E had never spoken publicly about being HIV positive prior to his diagnosis. His death exposed the deadly reach of the AIDS epidemic beyond stereotypes. It had taken down one of the toughest, most influential voices in urban music. Eazy-E's final statement urged fans to get educated about the disease, becoming an unexpected, powerful PSA. Though often remembered for controversy, his contribution to music is undeniable. His bold business moves opened doors for artists across genres, including R&B, and his tragic death underscored the urgency of AIDS awareness in communities too often overlooked. Johnny Taylor. Johnny Taylor was the very embodiment of Southern soul, gritty, heartfelt, and irresistibly smooth. Born on May 5, 1934 in Crawfordsville, Arkansas, Taylor began his career in gospel singing with the Highway QCs and later replacing Sam Cooke in the legendary Soul Stirrers. Like Cooke, Taylor eventually transitioned to secular music, signing with Stax Records in the 1960s, where he released some of the era's most beloved soul tracks. His 1968 hit, Who's Making Love, showcased his raspy, commanding vocals and marked his arrival as a solo R&B powerhouse. The single sold over 1 million copies, earning him a gold record and solidifying his place in American soul history. Taylor's voice embodied raw emotion, flirting with gospel intensity while embracing the sensuality of blues and R&B. Taylor's success continued into the 1970s and 80s with a string of major hits across multiple labels. His biggest commercial triumph came in 1976 with Disco Lady, which became the first single ever certified platinum by the RIAA. The track dominated both the R&B and pop charts and positioned Taylor as a crossover success in the evolving disco era. Despite his fame, Taylor led a relatively private life, and his declining health in the 1990s went mostly unnoticed by the public. On May 31, 2000, Taylor died of a heart attack in Dallas, Texas. However, reports and close family accounts later confirmed that AIDS-related complications contributed significantly to his passing. This revelation stunned longtime fans and highlighted the quiet toll the disease continued to take on music legends, particularly in the Black community where stigma often kept such diagnoses hidden. Johnny Taylor's musical catalog spans gospel, soul, funk, disco, and blues, a rare feat. His voice was the soundtrack to breakups, makeups, and late-night radio shows across America. Though his death was quietly mourned, his impact continues to echo, and his story serves as another stark reminder of AIDS' far-reaching, often invisible toll on R&B's greatest voices. Freddie Mercury. Although best known as the electrifying frontman of Queen, Freddie Mercury's influence reached far beyond the boundaries of rock music. His voice, artistry, and flamboyant style also impacted the worlds of R&B and soul-infused pop. Born Farrokh Bulsara on September 5, 1946 in Zanzibar and raised in India and England, Mercury's background was as eclectic as his musical tastes. While Queen carved its legacy in rock, many of their biggest hits, including Somebody to Love and You're My Best Friend, were deeply rooted in gospel R&B and soul harmonies. Mercury's 4-octave range allowed him to infuse emotional power into any genre he touched. Songs like Bohemian Rhapsody, while operatic on the surface, carried soul undertones in their vocal layering and melodic structures. His love for Aretha Franklin, Otis Redding, and other R&B greats shaped the way he interpreted melody and rhythm. His 1985 solo album, Mr. Bad Guy, leaned heavily into dance, soul, and funk, marking one of his most R&B-adjacent projects. In the late 1980s, Mercury's health began to visibly decline, prompting widespread rumors. Despite intense media speculation, he kept his illness private for years. It wasn't until November 23, 1991, that he publicly confirmed he had AIDS. Just one day later, on November 24th, he died at his London home from AIDS-related bronchial pneumonia. He was 45. Freddie Mercury's death was a seismic cultural moment. At a time when the disease was heavily stigmatized, especially among LGBTQ+ and artistic communities, his admission forced millions to confront the crisis head-on. The public outpouring of grief and the massive tribute concert that followed helped raise global awareness and funding for AIDS research. Though widely labeled a rock icon, Freddie Mercury's artistry transcended categories. His flair, vocal richness, and emotional delivery left a permanent imprint on pop soul and R&B history. His tragic end remains one of the most prominent examples of AIDS's devastating impact on music's most irreplaceable voices. Kenny Green. Kenny Green was one of the most gifted yet underappreciated voices of 1990s R&B, a powerhouse vocalist, songwriter, and producer whose impact outlasted his brief time in the spotlight.
His growth as an artist
Born January 17, 1970 in Brooklyn, New York, Green was surrounded by music from a young age. Inspired by the harmonies of gospel choirs and the smooth grooves of late 80s R&B, he helped form the group Intro in the early 1990s, alongside Jeff Sanders and Clinton Buddy Wyke. Intro's 1993 self-titled debut album became a defining moment in New Jack Swing and contemporary R&B. Green's falsetto soared on hits like Come Inside and Love Thang, but it was his pen that made him truly special. He wrote or co-wrote every track on the album and helped shape its sensual, emotionally rich tone. Green's sound was intimate but polished, rooted in real experiences and expressive vulnerability. In addition to his work with Intro, Green gained respect as a songwriter for other artists, including penning Reminisce for Mary J. Blige, an R&B classic that helped solidify her career. Despite the success, Green maintained a low profile. His sexuality, health, and personal life were mostly hidden from public view by necessity rather than choice. In a rare interview in the late 1990s, Green publicly disclosed he was bisexual and living with AIDS. This honesty was rare at a time when such revelations could derail a career, especially in the R&B industry, which often demanded hyper-masculine images from black male artists. Sadly, Green died on October 1, 2001, at the age of 32, due to AIDS-related complications. His death was a blow to R&B purists and quietly acknowledged by industry insiders. Today, Kenny Green is remembered not just as the voice behind Intro's hits, but as a courageous artist who refused to be boxed in. His contribution to R&B remains significant. His pen, his voice, and his truth added depth to a genre that often avoids its more painful realities.
Number 7.
Darryl Jamison. Darryl Jamison may not have been a household name, but for fans of 90s R&B and funk, he was a voice that brought fresh energy to a legendary group. As a member of the reformed Shalamar lineup in the early 1990s, Jamison stepped into big shoes, joining a group once fronted by Howard Hewitt, Jody Watley, and Jeffrey Daniel. Shalamar had dominated the late 70s and early 80s with infectious funk disco anthems, and their evolution in the new decade depended on artists like Jamison to modernize their sound. Jamison entered the spotlight during the group's comeback album, The Look 1990, alongside fellow newcomer Delisa Davis. With the music industry shifting toward New Jack Swing and hip-hop-infused R&B, Shalamar needed to adapt. Jamison's smooth, controlled tenor and his stylish stage presence made him the right fit. The group's updated sound featured electronic grooves, lush harmonies, and dance-driven beats, offering a fresh take while honoring their classic vibe. Though Shalamar's revival wasn't commercially dominant, it earned critical praise and resonated with loyal fans who saw Jamison as a talented bridge between eras. His performances on tracks like Games and Come Together demonstrated vocal range, romantic expression, and emotional restraint that stood out in the competitive male R&B group scene of the early 90s. Unfortunately, Jamison's career and life were both cut tragically short. In 2002, it was reported that he passed away due to complications related to AIDS. He had kept his diagnosis private, a decision not uncommon at the time due to the intense stigma, particularly for black male artists in the R&B genre. His death shocked fans who were unaware of his struggle. Darryl Jamison represents a chapter in R&B history that often goes overlooked, where second acts are quietly courageous, and talent can bloom outside of chart-topping fame. His legacy lies not in mass recognition, but in the hearts of those who followed his journey and the spirit he brought to a legendary group in transition. Tony Scott. Tony Scott's name may not have dominated R&B headlines, but her voice was instrumental in shaping the vibrant freestyle and dance pop movement of the late 1980s. As a member of the all-female group Seduction, Tony was part of a sound revolution that blended rhythmic R&B vocals with club-ready beats, creating music that resonated on radio dance floors and in underground scenes alike. Seduction was created by producers David Cole and Robert Clivilles, who later formed C+E Music Factory. With Tony as one of the vocal pillars, the group scored major success with their breakout hit, Two to Make It Right, a track that peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became a signature anthem of the freestyle genre. The song's infectious hook-pulsating beat and R&B-infused melodies captured the spirit of late 80s urban dance music, and Tony Scott's vocals helped make it a classic. Her voice, confident yet sweet, brought a soulful edge to the group's energetic tracks, allowing Seduction to stand apart from other dance pop acts of the time. Tony wasn't just a backup voice, she was central to the group's identity and success, helping define an era where freestyle R&B served as a bridge between traditional soul and modern club music. Behind the scenes, however, Tony was fighting a silent battle. In 1994, she passed away due to complications from AIDS. Her illness had been kept private, a reflection of the era's deep stigma toward the disease, especially among women in the music industry, who often had little support or understanding from the press or public. She was believed to be in her early 30s at the time of her death. Tony Scott's story is a poignant reminder of how the AIDS epidemic quietly claimed voices from every corner of the music world, not just the stars in the spotlight, but also the voices that gave harmony, heart, and rhythm to unforgettable eras. Her contribution to freestyle and R&B remains immortal through the timeless joy of the music she helped create. Dennis Conner. Dennis Dino. Conner was the unmistakable voice behind the sultry harmonies of H-Town, the early 90s R&B group that helped redefine slow jams for a new generation. Born November 18, 1969 in Houston, Texas, Dino formed H-Town alongside his fraternal twin brother Shazam Kevin Conner and their close friend G.I. Solomon Conner. Together, they created a sound that was raw, emotional, and deeply sensual, drawing comparisons to Jodeci and Boyz II Men. H-Town's debut album, Fever for Da Flavor, 1993, put the group on the map almost instantly. Their breakout hit, Knockin' Da Boots, was a bold, seductive anthem that soared to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and topped the R&B charts. Dino's powerful, passionate vocals and soulful delivery made the song a defining track of its era. The album went platinum, and Dino became the face and voice of the group's rising fame. Though still early in their career, H-Town quickly followed up with hits like Lick You Up and Emotions, blending carnal themes with surprisingly refined harmonies. Dino's vocal range and performance style gave the group emotional weight, distinguishing them from other emerging acts of the time. However, just as the group was ascending, tragedy struck. On January 28, 1993, Dino Conner died suddenly at the age of 24. Initial media reports cited a car accident, but according to multiple retrospective sources and accounts from those close to him, complications related to AIDS were a significant underlying cause. His diagnosis had not been publicly known, reflecting the widespread stigma and silence surrounding HIV/AIDS during that era, especially for young black male artists in the hyper-masculine R&B and hip-hop world. Dino's passing devastated the R&B community and left a permanent scar on H-Town's legacy. His voice remains etched into the DNA of 90s R&B, a blend of vulnerability, passion, and soul that few could replicate. While his life was brief, his impact lives on through slow jams that continue to influence artists to this day. Phyllis Hyman. Phyllis Hyman was more than a vocalist. She was a force of emotional expression, commanding attention with every note, and leaving behind a musical legacy rooted in elegance, pain, and authenticity. Born July 6, 1949, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Hyman's early years were shaped by gospel and jazz influences. After studying music and performing in local bands, she began her recording career in the mid-1970s, quickly distinguishing herself with a voice that was simultaneously rich, vulnerable, and grand. Her breakthrough came with Norman Connor's "You Are My Starship" in 1976, where her velvety tone captivated audiences. She followed that with a string of solo hits including "You Know How to Love Me," "Living All Alone," and the heartbreaking ballad "Old Friend." These tracks made her a staple on late-night radio and solidified her reputation as one of R&B and jazz's most emotionally powerful interpreters. But Hyman's life behind the spotlight was far more complex. Despite the glamour, she battled chronic depression, loneliness, and an industry that often failed to give darker-skinned black women their due. Her songs often reflected her emotional struggles. There was an unmistakable sadness in her delivery, especially in later works. In the mid-1990s, Hyman's health and mental well-being declined. She died on June 30, 1995, just days before her 46th birthday from a drug overdose that was ruled a suicide. Although the official cause was not listed as AIDS, numerous speculative reports and insider accounts over the years have suggested that she may have been privately dealing with complications related to AIDS. This has never been fully confirmed, but remains a persistent topic of discussion among music historians. Regardless of speculation, Phyllis Hyman's place in music history is undisputed. She broke barriers for black women in adult contemporary and jazz-influenced R&B, and her recordings continue to be studied, sampled, and cherished. Her voice, haunting, majestic, aching, remains timeless. She is remembered not only for what she sang, but for the deep truths she poured into every word. Shannon Jackson. Though not widely recognized in mainstream R&B history, Shannon Jackson was a soulful talent whose music resonated within the underground scenes of the 1970s and 1980s. Blending funk, traditional R&B, and hints of jazz, his voice embodied the gritty, heart-heavy soul that defined much of that era. Unlike commercial powerhouses of the time, Jackson's work circulated more intimately through local performances, specialty radio play, and vinyl sought after by devoted soul collectors. Born into a period where funk and soul were experiencing explosive innovation, Jackson's musical style mirrored the raw emotion of the times. He was heavily influenced by artists like Donny Hathaway and Bobby Womack, which reflected in his passionate delivery and lyrical honesty. His recordings were not numerous, but those that did surface carried depth, focusing on love, social tension, and the struggles of urban life. His vocal style was rugged yet sincere, the kind of voice you felt more than heard. Despite his limited mainstream exposure, Jackson garnered a loyal following in soul music circles. His songs were often found on compilation albums celebrated by DJs and collectors for their authenticity. He remained active in the music community well into the early 1990s, though he never sought or attained major label fame. Tragically, during the early 1990s, Shannon Jackson passed away due to complications related to AIDS. His death went largely unreported in major media, a reflection of both his underground status and the stigma attached to AIDS at the time, especially within black music communities. Many who admired his work were unaware of his diagnosis until long after his passing. Jackson's story represents countless artists whose talents never reached the heights they deserved and whose lives were cut short by a silent epidemic. His legacy is preserved by the deep-cut soul lovers who keep his recordings alive, reminding us that not all greatness finds the spotlight, but all loss deserves remembrance. Arthur Russell. Arthur Russell was a genre-defying genius whose contributions to R&B, disco, avant-garde, and minimalist music blurred every musical boundary. Born May 21, 1951 in Oskaloosa, Iowa, Russell's early fascination with both classical cello and experimental composition led him to New York City's downtown art scene in the 1970s. There, he
where
became a
jazz,
central
classical,
figure in a
and
movement
avant-garde
that fused
musicians were
improvisational
expanding the
jazz,
boundaries of
underground
music.
disco, and
After
electronic
attending the
innovation.
San Francisco Conservatory of
traditional
Music,
R&B
he joined the
artist,
New York
Russell's work
experimental
deeply
music
influenced
movement.
the genre's
Arthur
evolution.
Russell worked with
Under aliases like Dinosaur L and Loose Joints, he produced dance floor anthems such as Go Bang Number 5 and Is It All Over My Face, which married funk soul grooves and early house rhythms. These songs were revolutionary. They combined black musical traditions with avant-garde production, redefining what R&B and disco could sound like. Russell's collaborations with artists like David Byrne, Allen Ginsberg, and Philip Glass further exemplified his wide-ranging creativity. His 1986 solo album, World of Echo, filled with layered cello whispery vocals and experimental textures, was a quiet masterpiece. It didn't chart in his lifetime, but critics and musicians would later hail it as one of the most innovative records of the 20th century. In the late 1980s, Russell was diagnosed with HIV. He continued to record obsessively often, leaving dozens of versions of each song behind. As the disease progressed, his health deteriorated rapidly. He died on April 4, 1992, at the age of 40, due to AIDS-related complications. Unlike many artists of his time, Russell left behind an enormous archive of unfinished work, much of which has since been released posthumously. Today, he's revered not just in experimental music, but also among modern R&B producers and indie musicians who draw from his emotional depth and genre-blending brilliance. Arthur Russell's death was a devastating loss to music, not just for what he accomplished, but for the staggering potential left unrealized. Yet through the art he left behind, his spirit continues to challenge, inspire, and transcend boundaries. Patrick Cowley. Patrick Cowley was a pioneering figure in electronic dance music whose work helped shape the foundation of high-energy disco and futuristic funk-infused R&B. Born October 19, 1950 in Buffalo, New York, Cowley moved to San Francisco in the mid-1970s, where he immersed himself in the city's underground gay club scene. A classically trained musician with an obsession for synthesizers and emerging electronic sounds, Cowley developed a revolutionary style that pushed the boundaries of dance music. His breakthrough came through a close partnership with Sylvester the flamboyant disco soul icon. Cowley's synth programming and production redefined tracks like Do Ya Wanna Funk and Dance Disco Heat, giving them an urgent space-age quality. Their collaborations fused raw, gospel-rooted vocals with pulsating electronic backdrops, blurring the line between R&B disco and electronic music. Cowley's sound was new, bold, and undeniably queer. In 1981, he released Megatron Man, a solo album that further demonstrated his mastery of machine-driven rhythm and groove. Songs like Menergy and I Wanna Take You Home became club anthems, particularly within LGBTQ+ spaces, where Cowley's work was embraced as both musical innovation and cultural affirmation. He was a bridge between communities, marrying the soulfulness of black R&B with the mechanical aesthetics of emerging synth pop. By 1982, however, Cowley's health began to decline. He was diagnosed with AIDS at a time when the disease was barely understood and widely feared. He became one of the first known figures in the music industry to contract and die from the illness. On November 12, 1982, he passed away at just 32 years old. Patrick Cowley's death was an immense loss to music. His work not only laid the foundation for genres like techno and house, but also helped reframe R&B's possibilities in an electronic age. Today, he is celebrated as an unsung genius, a visionary who brought the future to the dance floor and paid the price for being too far ahead of his time. Ofra Haza. Ofra Haza was a transcendent voice whose blend of traditional Middle Eastern sounds with modern R&B and electronic pop made her one of Israel's most
Her big
beloved
break came in the late
artists and a global
1970s
cultural
when she took
bridge.
part in the Israeli
Born
Song
November
Festival.
19th,
Haza's
1957
early
in
musical
Tel Aviv
education
to a
was based
Yemenite
on the
Jewish
traditional
family.
songs of
Haza
her
began
Yemeni Jewish
performing as a
heritage.
teenager in her local neighborhood
Ofra Haza rose to
By the early
popularity in
1980s,
1983
she had become a
after her
national
song
star,
Abba
celebrated
Nibi,
for her
which won
radiant
the
voice
Israeli Song
and
Festival,
elegant stage
became her
presence.
first big hit.
Her international breakthrough came with the 1983 song Ninalu, which combined ancient Hebrew poetry with contemporary beats. The remix became a global hit, reaching audiences across Europe and the US, and was later sampled by Eric B. and Rakim in Paid in Full, further cementing her influence on modern R&B and hip-hop production. Haza's vocal tone, ethereal, haunting, yet warm, made her a standout in an era dominated by Western pop. She released multiple albums that fused electronic instrumentation with traditional melodies often sung in Hebrew Arabic or Yemenite dialects.
And listeners from Israel and abroad by fusing contemporary pop and electronic elements with Yemenite traditional traditions. With the release of her album Shadei Haza, experienced considerable global success in the mid-1880s
Haza was
and early
admired by musicians across genres, including Prince Paula Abdul and Iggy Pop, for her vocal purity and sonic innovation. But behind her artistry was a personal struggle hidden from the world. In early 2000, she was hospitalized with organ failure. It was later revealed that Ofra Haza had been battling AIDS, a diagnosis she had kept secret due to cultural taboos and societal stigma, especially in Israel. Her sudden death on February 23, 2000, at the age of 42, stunned fans globally and sparked public dialogue about HIV/AIDS in conservative communities. Ofra Haza's voice was often described as a prayer in motion, one that united the sacred with the modern. Her legacy remains not only in her music, but in her courageous, quiet dignity. Her passing was a painful reminder that AIDS did not discriminate by geography or fame, and her memory continues to shine as a symbol of both cultural pride and musical transcendence. Lonnie Pitchford. Lonnie Pitchford was a torchbearer of the Mississippi Delta blues tradition, an artist whose deep connection to African-American roots music kept the legacy of legends like Robert Johnson and Muddy Waters alive. Born on October 8, 1955 in Lafayette County, Mississippi, Pitchford was self-taught and remarkably gifted, known for playing a one-string diddley bow nailed to a board, a technique passed down through generations of rural blues musicians. From the 1970s through the 90s, Pitchford traveled the world performing at blues festivals, cultural exhibitions, and Smithsonian-affiliated events. His intense slide guitar playing and rhythmic foot stomps were not just musical acts. They were history lessons brought to life.
1980s,
He collaborated with
Pitchford made
Delta
his first
icons
significant
like John Lee
recording
Hooker,
when he
Othar
was
Turner,
included on a
and Jesse
compilation
May
CD,
Hemphill, and
which
appeared
helped
on
draw
several
notice to
traditional
his
blues
abilities.
anthologies.
In
His only solo
1992,
album, All
he
Around
published
Man,
his full-length
1994,
album, Backwoods
received
Blues,
critical acclaim
which was
for its
well
raw
received by critics
authenticity
for
and
both its
haunting emotion.
genuine blues sound.
Pitchford was more than a performer. He was a preservationist. He spent time working with the National Endowment for the Arts to document fading blues
Throughout
techniques,
his career, he
and was
collaborated
featured in
with other blues
documentaries
artists,
that explored
such
the
as
cultural
Mississippi
history
Fred
of
McDowell
African-American folk
and other
traditions.
Mississippi blues scene
His
peers.
performances combined storytelling,
Pitchford also
cultural
worked with
commentary,
musicians like
and
John Lee
musical
Hooker
depth
and
rarely
Muddy
seen
Waters
in modern
the
blues.
thriving Chicago blues.
Despite his contributions, Lonnie Pitchford remained largely unknown to mainstream audiences. In the late 1990s, his health began to decline, and in
Festivals,
1998,
where crowds
he
were
passed away at the
captivated
age
by
of
his
43
charismatic stage
from
presence
complications
and
related
skill
to
as a
AIDS.
musician.
His
He
diagnosis,
captured
like
the
that
spirit
of
of
many
classic
black male
Delta
artists
blues
of his
with
generation,
his unvarnished
was
and
not
impactful
widely
performances.
publicized.
Sadly,
This silence echoed the deep stigma that prevented many talented musicians from receiving the recognition or care they deserved. Pitchford's death was a major loss to American roots music. Though he never achieved commercial fame, his preservation of Delta blues traditions helped keep an entire musical culture alive. Today, his legacy lives on through archivists, blues musicians, and the cultural institutions he inspired. Klaus Nomi. Klaus Nomi was one of the most extraordinary and enigmatic performers to ever grace the stage, a classically trained German countertenor who became a cult icon in New York City's underground music scene. Born Klaus Sperber on January 24, 1944 in Immenstadt, Germany, Nomi moved to New York in the late 1970s and quickly became a standout performer with his hauntingly operatic falsetto, alien-like aesthetic and theatrical stage presence. While his musical identity defied easy categorization, Nomi incorporated elements of opera, new wave synth pop, and avant-garde performance art. His concerts were visually surreal and vocally astonishing. Songs like The Cold Song and Total Eclipse showcased his unique blend of Baroque classical technique with futuristic production. He became a regular fixture in clubs like Max's Kansas City and the Mud Club, and his otherworldly persona made him a cult favorite in the early MTV era. Though not traditionally R&B, Klaus Nomi's influence on queer music spaces, vocal experimentation, and theatrical pop intersected deeply with the genre's emotional vulnerability and stylistic boldness. He was briefly embraced by David Bowie, who invited him to perform on Saturday Night Live in 1979, exposing his avant-garde brilliance to a wider audience. By the early 1980s, Nomi's health was visibly deteriorating. In 1983, he became one of the very first public figures to die of complications from AIDS, at a time when the disease didn't yet have a name and was surrounded by misinformation and fear. He passed away on August 6, 1983, at the age of 39. His death was a cultural and artistic tragedy. Nomi was a pioneer in sound and image, unafraid to challenge conventions of masculinity, genre, and vocal identity. His work would later influence artists like Lady Gaga, Boy George, and David Byrne. Klaus Nomi's life was brief but unforgettable. His haunting voice still echoes as a powerful reminder of the AIDS crisis's indiscriminate devastation. Renato Russo. Renato Russo was the poetic soul of Brazilian rock, a singer-songwriter whose emotionally intense lyrics and baritone voice helped shape a generation. Born Renato Manfredini Jr. on March 27, 1960, in Rio de Janeiro, he was deeply influenced by both classic rock and Brazilian música popular brasileira (MPB). In 1982, he co-founded the iconic rock band Legião Urbana, which became one of the most important and politically charged bands in Brazil throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Legião Urbana's music resonated with disillusioned youth under Brazil's military dictatorship. Songs like Tempo Perdido, Faroeste Caboclo, and Pais e Filhos tackled topics ranging from existential despair to social inequality and generational pain. Russo's lyrical sophistication often blurred the lines between confessional poetry and protest. His delivery was raw, reflective, and deeply vulnerable, a stark contrast to the machismo typical of the era's male performers. Although his band was rooted in rock, Russo's vocal stylings and melodic compositions frequently leaned into the emotive cadences of R&B and soul. His ability to express longing, isolation, and spiritual introspection made him a crossover figure, bridging rock and intimate balladry in ways that defied categorization. In the early 1990s, Russo was diagnosed with HIV, a fact he kept hidden from the public. As his health worsened, he grew increasingly reclusive, though he continued recording. His final albums, especially A Tempestade 1996, are filled with haunting lyrics that many later interpreted as coded farewells. On October 11, 1996, he died at the age of 36 from AIDS-related complications. Russo's death devastated Brazil. He was not just a rock star. He was a generational voice, a literary mind, and an LGBTQ+ icon who later inspired open conversations about sexuality and HIV/AIDS in conservative Brazilian society. His legacy lives on through the enduring relevance of his music and the honesty he brought to every verse. Peter Allen. Peter Allen was an electrifying performer, flamboyant showman, and gifted songwriter whose life and career spanned continents and genres. Born Peter Woolnough on February 10, 1944, in Tenterfield, Australia, he began his musical career as part of a duo,
Allen
the
relocated
Allen
to Sydney when he was just a teenager.
In the 1960s, he moved to
He
the
began
US,
playing
where
in
his
neighborhood
charisma
clubs
and
and soon gained
songwriting
recognition
abilities
for his
caught the attention of
captivating
music moguls,
performances
including
and openness
Judy
to
Garland,
express.
Whose daughter, Liza Minnelli, would become his wife and later close friend, despite his eventual openness about being gay. While
Allen contributed to the success of several musical projects and penned songs for other musicians during the 1960s and 1970s.
That typified great
His ability
R&B
to write
balladry.
catchy, emotionally
His biggest success came as a songwriter, penning global hits like I Honestly Love You for Olivia Newton-John, which won the Grammy for Record of the Year in 1975. His own
pop
recordings,
songs that
including
connected
I
with
Go to
audiences,
Rio and
was a
Tenterfield
particularly
Sadler,
strong
blended
suit
bright
for his songwriting
theatricality
abilities.
with deeply personal
One of
storytelling.
his most well-known songs
Allen was
is
known for
I
his
Honestly
extravagant
Love You,
stage shows,
which Allen
feathered
co-wrote
costumes,
and was
piano acrobatics, and heartfelt ballads. But beneath the glitter was a sensitive artist whose lyrics often reflected themes of loss, longing, and identity. His openness about his sexuality in later years, especially in the conservative entertainment climate of the 1980s,
was a hit for Olivia Newton-John in 1974.
In the late 1980s,
he became a well-known songwriter throughout the world because of this song. Peter Allen began his own solo career in the 1970s, combining pop songs with theatrical productions to display.
He died on June 18, 1992, at the age of 48, due to complications related to AIDS.
As a solo performer, with a number of singles, such as I Go to Rio and Don't Cry Out Loud. Allen and his supporters suffered a terrible blow when he was diagnosed with AIDS in the late 1980s after first keeping his diagnosis a secret in 1992 in San Diego, California.
Allen bridged worlds.
The music and theater industries were shocked by his passing, and fans, musicians.
Fela Kuti. Fela Anikulapo. Kuti was more than a musician. He was a revolutionary force who fused rhythm rebellion and radical truth into a genre all his own Afrobeat. Born on October 15, 1938 in Abeokuta, Nigeria, Kuti was trained in classical music in London before moving to the U.S., where he absorbed the revolutionary energy of the Black Power movement. That fire returned with him to Nigeria, where he combined high-life funk jazz and Yoruba rhythms into politically charged compositions that reshaped African music forever. Fela's influence on R&B lies in his raw emotional expression, his driving polyrhythmic grooves, and his fearless storytelling elements that resonated deeply with soul funk and even hip-hop. His music tackled colonialism, police brutality, government corruption, and social injustice. Albums like Zombie Expensive Shit and Coffin for Head of State weren't just songs, they were anthems for the oppressed. And Kuti became a target of the Nigerian military state as a result. He founded the legendary Africa Shrine nightclub and led two groundbreaking bands, Africa 70 and Egypt 80, where he would perform non-stop, sometimes for hours. His sound was hypnotic, his lyrics unflinching, and his stage presence revolutionary. Though often associated with Afrobeat, his influence reached deep into the DNA of American R&B and funk, inspiring artists like James Brown Questlove and even Beyoncé. In the 1990s, Fela's health deteriorated. Rumors circulated, but it wasn't until his death on August 2, 1997, at the age of 58, that the truth came out. AIDS-related complications had claimed one of Africa's greatest musical warriors. His brother, Dr. Olukoye Ransom Kuti, publicly revealed the cause of death, sparking long overdue conversations about HIV/AIDS in Africa. Fela Kuti died as he lived unapologetically outspoken. His loss was not just musical, it was spiritual, political, and cultural. Through Afrobeat's global rise, his rebellious spirit continues to influence the soul of music. Ricky Wilson. Ricky Wilson was the sonic architect of the B-52s, the new wave band known for its eccentric flair, quirky humor, and danceable chaos. Born March 19, 1953 in Athens, Georgia, Wilson was a self-taught guitarist whose style defied convention. Using open tunings and playing with just 4 strings, he created jangly hypnotic riffs that defined hits like Rock Lobster, Planet Claire, and Private Idaho. Though the B-52s weren't traditional R&B, Wilson's guitar tone and groove-heavy playing were steeped in rhythm and soul. His music merged surf rock with punk energy and funk undercurrents, all while embracing the joy and eccentricity of queer culture. As one of the band's founding members alongside his sister, Cindy Wilson, Fred Schneider, Kate Pearson, and Keith Strickland Ricky gave the B-52s their distinctive sound and underground edge. Behind his infectious riffs, however, was a man who lived quietly. Wilson was known to be intensely private, especially regarding his personal life and health. When he was diagnosed with AIDS in the early 1980s, he kept it a secret even from many in his own band. At a time when AIDS was misunderstood and devastatingly lethal, Wilson chose to suffer in silence. On October 12, 1985, Ricky Wilson died from complications related to AIDS at just 32 years old. His death shocked fans and devastated the band. Only afterward did many learn of his condition, and his passing became one of the first high-profile AIDS-related deaths in the music industry. Ricky Wilson's death left a painful void in the B-52s, but his influence endured. The band eventually regrouped and went on to commercial success with Love Shack, carrying his spirit with them. Today, Wilson is remembered not only for his musical originality, but also as a quiet casualty of the AIDS crisis, a reminder that the disease did not spare even the brightest creative minds. These 20 artists didn't just make music, they made history. And yet their lives were cut short by a disease that was often ignored, silenced, or shamed. As we remember their brilliance, we must also confront the silence that surrounded their deaths. How many more voices were lost before the world chose to listen? Which of these artists left the biggest impact on you? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's honor their legacies together. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence, where we keep our legends alive truthfully and powerfully.